Before GoldenEye popularized first-person shooters on console, companies like 3D Realms and id dominated the PC space with the earliest incarnations of FPS. The genre has changed and evolved, but the core design philosophies of what made games like Duke Nukem 3D or Quake good still hold up today, and can be seen most notably in the recent Doom reboot. Lots of people miss the shooters of old, and with the retro resurgence that's been going on for years now, it was only a matter of time before developers started making throwbacks to the shooters of the 90s. Today, let's check out some recent first-person shooters that, if nobody told you otherwise, you'd probably just assume came out in 1997. A game very clearly inspired by Quake, Dusk is a first-person shooter made almost entirely by one guy. You play as Dusk Dude, who heard that there's apparently some secret treasure hidden within the town of Dusk, Pennsylvania, a town whose underbelly houses a network of Lovecraftian ruins. Because of some government meddling, the town was sealed off from the rest of the world by way of a wall, but that's not stopping Dusk Dude from infiltrating the town and finding what he's looking for. This game reminds me so much of the original Quake, but on the other hand, it thematically really doesn't. It invokes the same feeling of uneasiness, but in a completely different kind of setting. Obviously, there's a lot of other classic FPS influence in here as well, but the parallels to Quake are undeniable. It's kind of like Quake 1 meets Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You start out in a farmland setting, fighting off hordes of demonic goat things, these chainsaw guys, cultists, and probably the most terrifying enemy early on is this scarecrow enemy that's really not all that threatening once you realize they aren't hard to take down, but scary nonetheless considering it's an animated scarecrow wielding a double-barreled shotgun. The game has everything you'd expect out of a 90s era FPS. Interesting level design with hordes of enemies, secrets to find, an arsenal to expand, and even traditional bosses. The music is also incredible. It's creepy and ambient when it needs to be, much like Quake, but ramps up to guitar-driven metal pieces when the action gets heavy, not unlike current-gen Doom, honestly. I haven't played all the way through it yet, but what I have played is honestly amazing. Not only is the level design engaging and interesting, but the weapons all feel just really good to use, which is definitely something you kind of need to nail if you're gonna decide to make a game like this. Like, this is probably one of the best feeling super shotguns of any classic FPS I've played, and mostly the whole arsenal feels just as satisfying. I genuinely can't wait to play more of it. If you're an old school Quake fan, this is easily recommendable. It's got just enough influence from Quake to feel extremely familiar and scratch that itch you may have, but it also has its own tone and has enough originality to not just feel like a carbon copy or feel too derivative. This is one of those games where, despite how much I actually like it, I don't have all that much to really say about it. It's the kind of game you really need to experience for yourself, because so much of the game is atmospherically driven, and I don't think it's something that can really be quantified. Like anything survival horror, it's an experience that you really need to have firsthand to really grasp it. I can tell you right now, being interested in the game myself, I've seen a few reviews of it, and I just didn't really get it until I played it. So you should play it. Originally going to be titled Ion Maiden before facing legal action from the band Iron Maiden over a copyright dispute. Apparently the band had released a mobile game and claimed that not only were the titles similar, but so was the gameplay. This isn't true at all, and the Iron Maiden game is nothing like the build engine first-person shooter that 3D Realms ended up publishing under the new name Ion Fury. It's meant to be a prequel to a 2016 game called Bombshell. Never heard of it. Like I said, this game was built on a version of the build engine, which is notable for being the engine behind games like Duke Nukem 3D, Blood, and Shadow Warrior. Incidentally, it's apparently the first commercially released build game in 20 years. If you're unfamiliar with build engine games, they're kind of a stopgap between what Doom did and what Quake did. While still using 2D sprites for items and enemies, the environments are 3D and you can aim in any direction. Build engine games, while not being as advanced as fully 3D ones, do feel like a pretty big technological leap from Doom's engine. Ion Fury's setting is as cyberpunk as it gets, and your mission is to fight through each stage taking out cybernetically enhanced soldiers. Your typical 90s shooter fare is all here. Non-linear stage design with progression gated behind the acquisition of hidden keys found throughout the stages. The numerous weapons are all pretty hit or miss in my opinion, but I will say the shotgun feels really good to use, and with my speakers cranked up, the physical response I was getting from the sound design made it feel pretty satisfying, almost like rumble. I'd imagine playing this game with low volume would be drastically less effective, so I'd say you should probably play with headphones, and seeing as how this is a 90s style shooter, those headphones will also come in handy when trying to make sure the enemies in each area have been cleared, as they each have a different sound effect used as a tell. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really love this one all that much. I thought it was just me, but upon looking up reviews for it, it seems like the reception overall has been generally kinda lukewarm, usually hovering around the high 60s or low 70s. I can't speak for everyone else, but I will say from what I played, the level design wasn't all that engaging and didn't really make me excited to explore. Also, I had a save scum like a lot more than I usually do. I don't know what it was, but it seems like I always got hit no matter how many times I tried to avoid fire.
I'm not the best at shooters, so I know a lot of people will probably just tell me I suck, but I really never had this much trouble with other games like this. Another thing is, I'm not sure how many other games do this, but I really like the kind of classic FPS stage setup where you reach the end of the stage and your score is tallied up before entering the next mission of each episode. Ion Furies are all tied together, and the only thing separating each mission is a short loading screen in the form of what's essentially just a stutter. I guess it's good for immersion, and that's cool for seamless progression, but for me, it wasn't as satisfying as the game telling me I completed a level. I honestly didn't even know I was completing levels until like the 4th one. I originally thought this game just had extremely long missions. All in all though, the game is still pretty decent and the setting is pretty cool. It's worth checking out if you're a fan of Duke Nukem 3D, I think. A Medieval is awesome. A Medieval is a medieval-styled FPS published by New Blood, the same publisher that put out Dusk. Where Dusk was definitely Quake or Blood-inspired, a Medieval has far more influence drawn from Heretic or Hexen, if you couldn't tell. You're thrown into a medieval fantasy world which is actually still very reminiscent of Quake 1, and even has a similar way of selecting difficulty through a main hub with slipgates as opposed to just a standard text menu. Much like Hexen or Heretic, this game's weapons are pretty unconventional when compared to typical FPS fare. No guns here. You start off with a battle axe, but quickly acquire an entire arsenal of mana-driven weapons like an electricity-shooting trident, a sword that shoots energy beams that tears enemies in half, and a staff that rips literal planets out of space and fires them at enemies, which acts as the game's rocket launcher. This is one of the few classic-style FPS that I've played that I actually find all the weapons useful. Even the axe that you get at the start of the game is useful later on. I just personally didn't use it as much because it's not as fun. And I think that's one of the main selling points here. Pretty much all the weapons here are really fun to use without being overpowered. Slaying enemies also lets you pick up soul, and when you collect enough to fill your soul meter, you can unleash a super-powered mode that basically turns every weapon you have into something that can easily take down a room full of enemies. Save for this game's version of the BFG, which you still get pretty early on, you can get every single weapon very, very early in this game, which on one hand might spoil the game a little since you won't find any cool new weapons as the game progresses, but having a full arsenal of stuff to choose from early on without being overpowered is a testament to how balanced the game is. There's 7 episodes in total, and each mission is on the shorter side, but without feeling too short, and I honestly much prefer that to long, drawn-out levels that overstay their welcome. The level design itself is actually very reminiscent of Quake 1, or even the original Unreal, and I will say that the level design is extremely engaging and fun to explore, and of course, the stages are filled with secrets, which is par for the course at this point. Each episode culminates with a final mission in the form of a boss fight, which is a nice change of pace to look forward to after navigating through all the labyrinthian castle-like structures looking for keys or taking down enemies. I'm gonna tell you right now, it took me about 12 takes to say labyrinthian castle-like. That wasn't fun. As much as I like Dusk, I think I honestly like a Medieval even more. Dusk scratched the itch I had in terms of missing a genre or a way of game design, but a Medieval scratched the itch I had for something Lovecraftian or medieval, since I never got that after it abandoned the style Quake 1 had. It obviously leans way further into medieval fantasy than Lovecraft, but a similar tone is definitely there. This is easily going down as one of my favorite in the genre, and I can't recommend it enough. Also, I'd like to just say this game looks amazing, and despite the whole game being in 3D, I didn't even realize it before, but all the weapons are actually 2D sprites. This game is so good. So, Ratheon of Ruin is probably the game I was most excited for. It's another game published by 3D Realms, this time running on a modified version of the Quake engine. Looking at it though, I'd never have guessed because what they managed to pull off seems far more advanced than even anything seen in Quake 2. Now, I was really excited for this one for a few reasons. I know I keep mentioning Quake, but a quick look at some of these enemy archetypes is a dead giveaway that this game is heavily Quake-inspired. It has plenty of its own flair for sure, but you can't look at this and tell me it's not just straight up a scrag from Quake 1. Anyway, I was also pretty eager to check this game out because of a mechanic baked into the main melee weapon. You have this forearm blade that can be used to extend your jump. Holding the right mouse button pulls the blade back, and releasing it charges the player forward like a dash attack straight out of a Metroidvania. Or like Mega Man X, I guess. Because of this, it's no surprise that this one's a little more platform heavy than anything else I've covered in this video, and for the most part, it's good. It does take some getting used to as there are momentum-based physics programmed in that take a little practice to fully figure out. Currently, there are only 3 levels available. At the start of the game, you're thrown into a big hub area and can enter any available levels in any order. Because you have the freedom to choose which stages you tackle in which order, the difficulty scales accordingly. For the most part, so far this game is pretty solid, but despite being very eager to play it, I was a little bit disappointed. Don't get me wrong, this is by no means a bad game, but there are some things about it that really started to get on my nerves. I will say right now, the stages totally overstay their welcome. I'm no speedrunner, but the first stage took me almost an hour to complete. Even given the amount of times I died, it definitely dragged on to the point where I wasn't really having much fun anymore. Some of the enemy placement is pretty frustrating too, and unfortunately, because this game's save mechanic doesn't operate like a typical old school FPS, You can't save scum, and it can get pretty irritating if you're having a hard time with a specific room. Instead of being able to save to your heart's content, progress is saved kind of like how it works in Ori and the Blind Forest. There are very limited dedicated save points, but in between you can use a soul tether and save wherever you want. Problem is, the soul tether is a limited resource, and if you find yourself in a difficult situation and you have no soul tethers left, you're out of luck. This led to a lot of replaying areas I've already finished a bunch of times, and it kind of sucked the fun out of it for me, especially when considering how long the levels are. I have a few gripes with it, but overall though, this game is honestly very good. It's just got some caveats for me that hinder the experience just a bit. I don't think it's a deal breaker though, and I'm excited to see how the rest of the game turns out. Now that's all for the games I personally checked out, but I do want to give a little honorable mention to a couple games I wasn't able to actually play myself yet. One isn't out yet, and the other I feel didn't fully fit the criteria for what I wanted to do with this video. Still, I feel like I should mention them. The first is a game called Proteus. Currently the only person I've seen cover it is Civi, and that was about a year ago when it was in pre-alpha. I have no idea how much progress has been made by now, but the developers were nice enough to send me over some footage to use. The game looks very weird, but in a good way. The graphic style make it look like a really advanced version of the build engine. It's not 3D enough to look like Quake, but it's way too advanced to look like Duke Nukem or any other build engine game for that matter. Enemies are still 2D sprites, but there are way more frames of animation, and the lighting effects make all the environments look very polished and modern. It's quite an odd mashup. The Steam page says the game is coming out in 2020, but I haven't got the slightest idea when. The game definitely looks promising though. Now, the other game I haven't checked out, and that I think doesn't exactly fit in with the others here, is Project Warlock. Now, once again, this game looks similar to a build engine game, but all the graphics are made up of blocky pixel art, making it look like something more akin to a 3D 8-bit style game as opposed to something like Duke Nukem 3D or Doom. Think that 3D Mega Man FPS fan game that came out a while back. Obviously way more detailed and polished than that though. It's got even more in common with old 8-bit games as there's limited lives and no quick saving. It's kind of like an old school NES game meets a 90s FPS. It looks great, and it's definitely something I'd like to check out at some point. Now, before I go, I wasn't sure how to approach talking about this during each game's segment proper, but the music of most of these games, namely Dusk, Medieval, Wrath, and now Proteus, were all composed by a guy named Andrew Hulshult. I never knew about him before playing all these games, but all of them have amazing soundtracks. Apparently, he also worked on music for Quake Champions as well. Before learning this, I was gonna go into this saying that with Mick Gordon and id breaking up, Andrew Hulshult is a no-brainer to take the helm for the next Doom game, but it appears as though his foot's already in the door. I'm not saying this is happening, nor am I alluding to it. I have no idea if anyone at id has talked about the idea of that, but it sure sounds good to me. Just a suggestion. Anyway, that about wraps it up. 90s FPS games are definitely in a league of their own, and I'm glad that the genre was able to be revived and supported. And if the success of the recent Doom games are anything to go by, I'd say the genre has a place alongside current-gen shooter design. If you're a fan of old-school FPS games, I'd definitely check out any of these games. And if you've never played a game like this before, maybe give them a try. You might just find something you like. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it and want to see more, there's a couple other videos right there you can check out. And if you want to subscribe and see everything that I upload, just subscribe and then tap the bell icon. And if you want to help support the channel, I also have a Patreon right there too.